coming out tonight. I really appreciate all of your presence here. My name is Michael Fields, as the choir said. I'm originally from Fort Jennings, Ohio. I graduated back in 2017, seems like forever ago. I currently live in New York, which is a very far off land, very different from good old Putnam County. And I'm in law school there. I go to St. John's University School of Law. I'm in my third year, so I'll graduate in May, which is very exciting. I'm done with school, hopefully, for the rest of my life. And what's really great about law school is it changes the way you think. And the first day, all of us 1Ls are sitting there, and the dean gave a speech, and he was very prideful in making it known that all of our minds would be warped in some way by the end of the first semester. And you know, it doesn't really mean anything to us, right, when we're sitting there. I mean, we just graduated college and have no idea what's going on, and it's like, well, I know the way I should think, you know, my mind's not going to be warped. Well, spoiler alert, like, it is, right? You start thinking a lot more technically, and you start asking the question why, which is one of my favorite questions. My sister here, we can't have a normal conversation without me interjecting and asking why. You know, she'll say, hey, I had some Cinnamon Toast Crunch this morning for breakfast. And I'm like, why? It doesn't really make really good conversation or interesting conversation, but I like to get to the bottom of things, right? Like, why are we doing this? And with this question, why, I ended up infecting my faith with that question, right? Asking why this, why that, and ultimately, why am I Catholic? So that happened in law school, but let's take a step back here and see how I ended up getting to asking, why am I Catholic in the first place? So, as any good story, we'll start from the beginning. As I said, I was raised in Fort Jennings, but I wasn't born there. I was born in Cincinnati, more specifically Mason, Ohio. But shortly after I was born, my family moved back to Putnam County, and I think everybody's testimony starts off, or most people's testimony starts off with, well, I practice this faith because my family did. And that can seem like a bland start to a story, right? I mean, it's not super exciting, but I think it's important. Although it is rather bland and common, it is important, and it's so important that it made it into the Bible itself. I'm sure everybody is aware of the most exhilarating gospel reading throughout church. Any guesses? Anyone? No? Okay. The beginning of Matthew, the genealogy of Jesus, right? When this gospel reading is said, all of us are pumping our fists into the air, like, yes, Father, keep on reading. Abraham was the father of Isaac, and Isaac the father of Jacob, and Jacob the father of Judah, and so on and so on. And how exciting it is to sit in the pews at church and just hear all of these dudes being fathers of other dudes, right? Well, although it is rather boring and not super exciting, it shows the importance of family and history and tradition, and passing, you know, your faith and tradition on from generation to generation. So although most of our Catholic stories and Catholic faith begins with, well, my family was Catholic, don't overlook that. I think that's really important and is really core to the faith that we do practice. So in addition to my family being Catholic and helping me be a good Catholic boy, I was also raised in Fort Jennings, which is extremely Catholic. I don't think we have really any other faith traditions that I know of in Fort Jennings. Maybe it's changed since I've lived there. But we have one Catholic church in the middle, and even the public school buses take the little kids to church before actual school starts, which might be a constitutional violation based on the law that I'm learning, but like we don't have to really talk about that, right? Just sweep it under the rug until someone, you know, brings it up as an issue. And I think community is really important. There's so many Bible verses about, you know, the importance of community and how the church is really the body of Christ, right? When one person struggles, the whole body struggles. And I think that's really important to acknowledge, and I think we should be grateful that we all live in Putnam County and are able to really build up the faith with other like-minded people. But faith and community, although important, I think we should get a little deeper, right? Because we don't really have our family and community with us all the time, right? And that leads me into the second part of my faith journey. When I moved off to college, I went to the University of Dayton, and I didn't have my family with me. I wish they could stay in that little small dorm that I lived in with my one roommate, but they weren't. And I also didn't have my Fort Jennings community with me. I was the only one in my class to go to the University of Dayton, so I was alone. I was alone, and I had the choice to practice my faith. Although the University of Dayton is a Catholic university, I lived on a floor with business majors, and if anybody knows anything about business majors, they like to party, and they like to party hard. The first night I was in my dorm, I went across the hall to this guy who had jorts on. And it was like the craziest thing ever. I've never seen anybody wear jorts before. And I went over, and we were all sitting in his dorm, and he passed around this drug. And it was like crack cocaine, and I couldn't believe it. I was like, oh my gosh, really? Like, this is happening my first night? Actually, it wasn't crack cocaine. Sorry, Mom. I see you like freaking out internally over there. But it was a jewel, and I've never seen a jewel before. Fort Jennings really sheltered me. I'm sure all of you know like what a jewel is, but I didn't. I was like, what is happening right now? And they're like, Michael, do you want to hit? Well, what does that even mean? Like, no, I don't want to hit, and I don't know what's in that thing. So college is just like a weird time, right? You can choose to follow your faith, you can choose to do drugs, really choose to do whatever you want, right? As long as you don't get put in jail. And luckily, the University of Dayton has a lot of established organizations and programs that you can take advantage of to really strengthen your faith. There's a chapel in every residence hall, which is super nice. And there's also a big chapel at the center of campus with like 8 mass times on Sunday. So if you can't go, like, joke's on you, like that's a you problem, right? So I was able to strengthen my faith at the University of Dayton and just really deepen my relationship with Jesus. But there was a roadblock with me really deepening my relationship with Jesus, and that was pride. I'll be the first to admit it, I'm rather prideful. I love attention from people. This is why I'm really thriving right now, speaking to all of you. And at the University of Dayton, the real roadblock for me to really deepening my relationship with God was, what am I doing this for, right? Oh, I can lead this retreat because I can get attention from it. You know, I can just know some Bible verses and act like I know what they mean and act like holier than thou and, you know, give people some life lessons from it. But I don't necessarily have to live it out. I just, you know, get the attention from it. Or I can be a Eucharistic minister at church, right? I can do it Sunday, 8 p.m. Mass. But best believe I'm going to be at that number 2 spot right next to Father Jim Fitz because I want to get the most people to come to my bread line, you know? I don't want to be on the corner because what's the point? You know, what's the point of doing it if it's not about me? And that was just really unfortunate, right? It really prevented me from deepening my relationship with God. But still, I still deepened my relationship, right? Because I was independent. It wasn't my family forcing the faith on me and dragging me out of bed to go to Sunday Mass every week. So that was great. And then I really got slapped across the face after I graduated from the University of Dayton because I ended up going to work in Gatlinburg, Tennessee. Gatlinburg, Tennessee is a really magical place. I don't know if any of you have ever been there, but it's surrounded by the Great Smoky Mountains, which is this beautiful nature preserve. And then you have this one strip of just absolute chaos. 10,000 ice cream shops. A donut shop, which is actually really good if you end up going there. You know, like Confederate flag bikinis in like the window, in like the shop window. Just like so much chaos, right? But I worked there, and it was with a program called A Christian Ministry in the National Parks. So, as the name says, you're doing Christian ministry in a national park. I was placed in the Great Smoky Mountains of Tennessee, So I did that every Sunday, and then throughout the week I worked at a mountainside resort called Anapista in the gift shops, trying to keep the really hot customers happy. But with the Christian ministry, it's very broad, right? It's not a Catholic ministry in the national parks, which I think all of us can assume. I mean, unless there's like a Catholic church in the Great Smoky Mountains somewhere, like we assume it's going to be like more Christian oriented, just like broadly. And it was great. It was the best summer of my life. But I worked with 5 other people, 5 other students, and they weren't Catholic. They were all Protestants, which was absolutely amazing and absolutely eye-opening because they asked me questions that I just didn't know the answer to, right? Why do you pray to Mary? I don't know. Why does the Eucharist not taste like human flesh? I don't know, but I swear it's actually Jesus. Why don't you read your Bible? I think that might be a personal problem, but yes, very good question. And I was just frantically trying to answer these questions for these people, you know, texting my old roommate who was entering the seminary, going to Ascension Presents, and trying to find a Father Mike video that like would help answer these questions, right? And then the next morning I would be like, hey, like I actually have an answer now, but it wasn't authentic, right? Like I didn't have the answer for them right away. But although we might not have the answer, I think we can say a lot more by our actions than the words that we give as responses, right? So there's this saint that I've grown really close with this past year. I didn't know her when I was in Gatlinburg, but I've gotten to know her in law school. Her name is Saint Therese of Lisieux. Anybody know her? Yeah? Man, yeah. Big fan. So she was a saint. She died at the age of 24, so literally my age. She entered the religious life at 15 and just felt really intimidated by all of these older religious sisters, right? How can I do anything great when all of these sisters have so much more years of experience and I'm just, you know, a simple child? And she found a lot of solace and a lot of love from the Lord with just doing simple acts with great love. And then that's why she became a saint, was just doing simple acts with great love and offering everything up to the Lord, whatever she did. So, although I didn't know her, I think she was working through me when I was in Gatlinburg, Tennessee, because there was a Catholic church in Gatlinburg, Tennessee, believe it or not, and it was about a 20-minute walk away from my apartment, and they had morning mass every day at 8 a.m. And I always worked the late shift at work, so I started working at like 10 a.m. So I would wake up every morning at 7 a.m., and I would go to Mass every morning. And that blew the Protestants' minds, right? Like, how could you stay up so late, partying with us, and then wake up the very next morning so early and go to church? What's happening at church? What could be so great? Well, I ended up getting all of them to come to Mass with me at least once, which was great. And it showed really, you know, the joy that Mass provides to people, right? And that just goes to show, you know, how like very simple acts that we do can lead to a greater impression on people than just saying, hey, we pray to Mary because of this reason, or the bread doesn't taste like Jesus because of this reason, right? I think speaking with actions does a lot more than speaking with words. So when I first went to Mass with some other people, I went with 2 people out of my group, Kate and Noreen. And Kate was really excited to go. Noreen, she was always late, always a struggle to get out of bed. But we got up and left the apartment on time. And as we're walking, I told them, you know, gave them the rundown of Mass, right? We're going to be standing a lot. We're going to be sitting a lot. We're going to be kneeling a lot. We're going to be reciting things. And, you know, feel free to join in. You don't have to, but if you know the words, you know, feel free. And also, you know, you don't have to kneel if you don't want, but just like sit, so like you're not standing when everybody's kneeling, because like that's just like kind of weird, you know. And I said, most importantly, this is a morning Mass, right? So there's going to be like 5 other people there. So don't be intimidated. It's just like old people in Gatlinburg, Tennessee, like they're not going to judge you. there's literally not going to be anybody there. So we go, we walk, we open up the doors, and there's 2 sets of doors leading into the church, right? So we open up the first set of doors. And it's 7:45, we have 15 minutes till Mass starts, and we just hear all these men chanting prayers. And I'm like, this is not okay. Like, I thought I had this under control. Like, I thought I told them everything was going to be fine. Like, they shouldn't be intimidated by anything. And all these men are chanting, like, what is happening, you know? And we open up the second set of doors, and not only is it laymen, but they're all priests. The whole chapel is full of priests. And this is like a small chapel, so there's only like 20 priests. But the fact that it's full of priests, and like I'm bringing these 2 girls in, and what do you do, right? Well, so we find a spot like next to priests, and like priests don't like to sit together for some reason. Like they like to spread apart. So it was like really hard to find a seat, but we ended up finding one. And we just sit there, and like they keep on chanting these like prayers, and the girls look at me and they're like, what is happening? You know, what are they doing? And I don't know. I think it's morning prayer, but like I'm flipping through the missal, like trying to find like their words, and I can't, and it's like chaos, right? Well, their morning prayer stops, and like there's silence, and Mass starts up, and it's completely normal. And I'm like, okay, like I know what's going on now. You can follow my lead. Everything's under control. And then peace happens, right? Peace. Peace be with you, where everybody is supposed to shake each other's hands. And then I get a surge of like nervousness again, because I'm like, I didn't let them know about peace, and there might be like, I don't know, embarrassment, or, you know, I don't know what's happening. And the priests were super nice, and they shook everybody's hands, and it was great. And I was like, okay, like everything's fine. Go through the rest of Mass, everything's good. And then we leave Mass, and we get out the double set of doors, and I turn to them and I say, so, you know, what did you think? And they said, yeah, that was interesting. You said there were going to be 5 people there, and there were 20 priests. But yeah, like other than that, it was fine. And I was like, yeah, like totally sorry about that. I guess they had like some sort of convention or something in Gatlinburg, Tennessee. So all the priests in the diocese were there. And I said, well, like, what did you think, like, other than like walking into like 20 priests in the chapel, right? And they said it was really good, and we really enjoyed it, and we really enjoyed how welcoming and joyful the priests were, especially during, you know, they didn't know what it was. They said, especially during the time where we shook each other's hands. And I said, yeah, that was really beautiful. I think that just goes to show you again, you know, how we can really show our Catholic faith through our actions, right? I didn't know what was happening. I didn't know what morning prayer was or what they were doing. And frankly, I still don't understand what they did. Like, I kind of pushed that out of my memory of, you know, what they were doing in there. And it just shows how much actions can speak louder than words, right? So the rest of the summer was great. These 5 Protestants became really my best friends. And I was actually in Gatlinburg this past weekend after 2.5 years. We had a small little reunion there, and we just picked up right to where we left off, which was just absolutely incredible, which I think really shows how, you know, different faiths can really build each other up and really impact the world for the better. So Gatlinburg was like a weird time. It was just like a summer. I left feeling like a celebrity. Everybody knew me for some reason. I would go to this donut shop every day, and like the owner knew me. Everybody at the Mountainside Resort knew me. It was just like really weird. I was like, I don't know what's happening. Like, Gatlinburg people need more to do than like care about me, right? But then the next thing was heading off to New York, right? And I told myself, as I was leaving Gatlinburg, New York is not going to be like this, right? Like, nobody's going to care about me. It's going to be super different. I'm going to be super sad. And I said that hoping after saying it, it wouldn't come true. But then I went to New York and it came true. I got poison ivy when I got to New York somehow. I didn't get poison ivy all summer long. And we were doing all these weird hikes. And then I go to New York and like I break out in poison ivy for some reason. New York was really hard. The first year of law school is just generally hard, but doing it in New York is also very difficult. But the one thing that I had was my faith, which is great. And what's great about the Catholic Church is you can go to any church in the world and it's like the same. You could be like, oh, I should stand now because this word was said, or I should sit now, which is really great. And there was a Catholic church right around the corner from where my apartment was. And unfortunately, it wasn't full of young people like you. It had an older demographic, but that is totally fine. Grandma and Grandpa, we still appreciate your presence. But it was difficult, right? I just spent the summer with 5 young people to really help build my faith, and now I'm in New York alone without any friends and any like Catholic people. In St. John's, I was like, it's a Catholic school, like we should have Catholic support. Well, not at the law school, we don't. They got rid of the priest. There was like no Catholic Law Students Association. I was like, cool, this is really great. And as I said, now we're bringing back like that first statement I had, and like we're bringing it back of why be Catholic. So I like struggled through the first semester, and I still had all of these Protestant questions kind of lingering in the back of my mind. And I was like, well, what can I do about this, right? Like I don't just want to like think about it. I like action. I like solution. So maybe I can make like the survival guide to Catholicism and just have like a small book like this and just have people carry it around, and when a Protestant is like, hey, you, like, why do you pray to Mary? You could like flip to page 209 and be like, well, according to this, like, this is why we do it. So I had this running Word doc with me on my laptop, and I was walking to school each day, which was like a 20-minute walk, and on my walk to and from school, I would just like think about, you know, what questions should be in the survival guide, and, you know, possible answers I could give as well. And I would just put them in the Word doc. You know, why do we pray to Mary? Well, this is like an answer I think would suffice, but here's also a Father Mike video that like might have some good language as well that I could include. And I was doing that, and it was like a week or so after I was, you know, writing up these questions, and I came across the question, why be Catholic in the first place? And it kind of stopped me in my tracks because it's such a foundational question, right? Like all these other questions about why we pray to Mary and why we believe in the Eucharist kind of build off this foundational question. I never really like asked myself that. And of course, like you give like testimonials in college and everything, but like, I don't know, I never like point blank asked myself that. And I was walking home, and like there's all these big trees when I walk home, and I just kind of like stood there and I was like, dang, this is like kind of sad. And I had like scraps of an answer, right? Like my family's Catholic, like I believe in the Eucharist, and like that's pretty awesome. But like nothing was compelling to me. So I did what any reasonable person would do, and I texted 20 of my closest friends and said, hey, why are you Catholic? Let's hop on a Zoom call and like spend a couple hours of you like telling me why you are. So that was like my life for a couple months, maybe like close to a year. I would hop on these Zoom calls with my friends and just have them tell me why they were Catholic. And then I would be like a bit aggressive and like ask them questions after, you know, they gave their answer, right? And a lot of these answers were really interesting, and these conversations were really fruitful. So here's like where my talk transitions from like my testimony into like more academic, I guess, if you want to put it that way. And, you know, giving you guys some sort of foundation for why we are Catholic, right? Or if we're not Catholic, why we should be, right? So I would ask everybody, why are you Catholic? And a lot of answers that I got were, it's true. The Catholic faith is true, and that's why I believe it. There was one guy I interviewed, and he said, well, when I was in high school, I didn't think it was true. And he went to a Catholic high school, and his teacher said, well, if you don't think it's true, look at the other religions and see if they are true. And he looked at the other religions and found out that, well, the Catholic faith has the best aiming to be true. Which is really great and really, really good. But if somebody came up to me as I was leaving the Catholic Church and said, hey, why did you just spend an hour of your life in there? And I said, well, because it's true. I don't think they would be like, well, sign me up, let's go. I mean, if it's true, what am I doing, right? Which reminds me of another Bible verse, 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 15, that says, always be prepared to make a defense to anyone who calls you to account for the hope that is in you, yet do it with gentleness and reverence. So what does that mean, right? Does saying I'm Catholic because it's true, does that really go toward what 1 Peter is saying? I don't think so, right? I don't think that's doing it with gentleness. I mean, you could say it kindly, well, I think it's true. I don't think that changes, the response, right? So how can we, share the faith and really believe in the Catholic faith in addition to just knowing that the Catholic faith is true? And there are three kind of sub-points to this, trueness that I'm going to share with you that a lot of people touched on as I was interviewing them, wasting 2 hours of their life over a Zoom call. So the first one is history, the history of the Catholic Church. I think a lot of people are familiar with this, right? We have record of all of the popes since Peter, right? So chilling with Pope Francis right now, and all the previous popes back to Peter we have record of. And Peter was with Jesus. That's pretty awesome, right? And to have that direct lineage, I think gives us a lot of hope in the trueness of the Catholic Church, right? And building off of that history, we go into authority, which is the second point, which is also what people mentioned. Authority is a scary word sometimes. When you think of authority, you think of this really big man in a dark suit, telling you what to do, which, I mean, kind of makes sense, but also it's really helpful, right? If we believe in a faith to end up, bettering our lives or getting to heaven, why should we be confused? We need an authority to tell us what is right and what is wrong. And so in addition to these white Catholic conversations I had with my friends over Zoom, after I completed those, I also went to the 5 Protestants I worked with, and I asked them why are they the denomination that they chose to be. And just like I did with my Catholic friends, I aggressively asked the Protestants questions after they gave their answer. And something that really made me nervous was the lack of authority within, non-Catholic Christians. I would ask them, where do you get your source? Where do you get your source of authority? And they said the Bible. That's great, I think that's a really good answer. I said, but what if something's not in the Bible? Where do you go to? And they said, well, it depends, Sometimes I go to this book, just a random book, or I go to my pastor, and I said, well, what gives them the authority? And they said, well, I just trust them. I just kind of know. And I was like, ooh, okay. And that really made me nervous about their reasoning, right? It almost seemed, contradictory. And it really made me have hope in the Catholic Church, just because we have that source of authority to tell us what is right and what is wrong. And with this, what is right and what is wrong, I mean, some issues, can be swept under the rug, right? Some issues don't necessarily affect us personally, but at the end of the day, doing what is right and what is wrong betters our lives, you know. And I think the authority can sometimes be restricting, right? You know, well, why should I listen to this authority if it ends up restricting my freedom? If the church says I need to go to church every Sunday, like I have so many better things to do on a Sunday than go to church, right? Why should I listen to the church? I mean, I get that they have authority, but is that really bettering my life? And I think that's like a really good question, and it kind of goes into like the philosophical problem of pain, right? Like, well, what about the people who do go to church every Sunday and their lives aren't bettered? Well, what does that mean, right? So there's this writer called C.S. Lewis. He wrote the Narnia series, if any of you are familiar with that, but he also is like a prolific Christian writer as well. He wrote this book called The Great Divorce, which is like very deep and like uses a whole bunch of like really big words. And the book describes a bus trip from hell to heaven and just, you know, the different people along the way and how they ended up in hell or how they ended up in heaven. And C.S. Lewis talks about, you know, the lost in hell and how they look back on their life and they see all of their pleasures in life and how those are just ruined by hell, just like infecting that, right? Because at the end of the day, their pleasures don't mean anything if it's not aligned with God's will. And then he talks about the blessed in heaven and how they look back on their life and all of their struggles and all of their pain. And, you know, if they went to church on Sunday, even though they were super busy and it was extremely sacrificial to them, how that is now glorified 100 times over. I think that just really wraps up the authority, right? You know, the authority can be restricting, but at the end of the day, freedom isn't doing what we want to do, it's doing what we ought to do. And doing what we ought to do ultimately leads to heaven. And then when we're in heaven, all of the struggles that we have in our life are glorified 1,000 times over, compared to ending up in hell and just all of like the little pleasures that we have just, you know, being distorted. So we have the history, we have the authority, and then lastly, of course, is the Eucharist. And I think every person that I interviewed about why they are Catholic said this answer, which is great. But the Eucharist can often seem like abstract and hard to reach, right? I mean, what does that mean? Like, I'm Catholic because of the Eucharist. It's hard, right? I mean, even for us Catholics to go before the Lord in adoration and, you know, not be distracted, it is difficult, right? So, you know, to say I'm Catholic because of the Eucharist and then not go to adoration or to go to adoration and then just be distracted, like, what is that really saying? I'm doing Catechism in the Year with Father Mike right now in the podcast, and there was an episode on atheism and agnosticism. And he made a really sad statement about how we can really affect those religions, right? Like, we like to push those people like off into a corner and say, hey, like, this is your fault, right? Like, if you only did this thing, like, you would believe. But is that true, right? I mean, people look at us and the way we live as a sign of our faith. And if we're not treating the Eucharist as it's supposed to be treated, what does that mean for other people, right? If the Eucharist is our reason for Catholicism, why are we not being disciplined in Mass? You know, don't get me wrong, like, I'm not going to listen to the gospel or the homily, but when I go up to receive, like, I'm going to treat this like a special piece of bread, because it is, you know, I believe that, right? I believe that Jesus is in the piece of bread. But right after I receive it, like, all bets are off. I did what I was supposed to do, I gave reverence to it, but like, I'm done. That's my obligation. I did what I was supposed to do, and that's it. Like, what does that show to other people, right? I think it goes into debates, and like the problem, you know, I had with the Protestants. They would ask me, you know, why can't I receive? And it's like, well, because you don't believe in the true presence. Well, Jimmy over here, like, receives, and, like, he hasn't been to confession in 5 years, right? Like, what does that mean, you know? I think it's really a question to think about. And so when you think about, you know, your relationship with the Eucharist, I think there's, like, two sides of it, right? There's, like, the reverence, and then, you know, like, the personal side. And these are really intermingled, and, you know, your personal relationship with the Eucharist ends up how you revere it, right? And I think, you know, if the Eucharist is a reason for you being Catholic at the end of the day, how is your personal relationship with it? And, I mean, I'm not trying to be up here like, oh, my relationship's like the best thing ever. Like, I know how to do it, because I personally don't. And it's definitely a learning process. And luckily, you know, being in New York has helped me with that. I was able to go to a Eucharistic Congress this past semester with a group of students just to learn more and more about it. But, you know, St. Thomas Aquinas said, you know, the Eucharist is love. And, you know, it's the biggest sacrament of love. And when you go there, you don't have to be anything, right? You don't have to be special. You just have to go and really give yourself to God. And really, that's what I found peace with, right? I think there's a distinction between, you know, not being anything special and, like, not being reverent, right? You don't go and, like, make a fool, right? Like, hey, look at me, everyone. I'm here. I'm supposed to be, like, adoring Christ, right? You have to recognize that Jesus is in the true presence, but, you know, just, like, leave everything behind. I think that's the most important thing, and that's what's really helped me grow closer to the Eucharist, is just leaving everything behind. And, you know, you can, like, set a time for yourself, like, I'm only going to be in there for 15 minutes. I think that's really helpful as well. And just be, you know, just sit there and adore Christ in the Eucharist. So, as I wrap up my speech today, I just want to thank you all so much for your attentiveness. And I hope that you can reflect and really get an answer for yourself of why, you know, you are a Catholic yourself, or if you're not, why you practice the denomination that you do. And as I wrap up this speech, I just want to leave you with one last question that I think, like, really can jumpstart your reflection on that. And it comes from one of the people I had a Zoom meeting with. And as we wrapped up the Zoom, he teaches theology in a high school, actually. And he goes, Michael, I want you to reflect on a question, you know. Whenever I'm struggling with faith, I often ask myself, what would my life be like if I didn't believe in Jesus? You know, what would my life be like? Would I have different relationships? Would I be as healthy? And it's a really scary question to ask yourself, right? I think you can get a lot of scary answers from it. But I think at the end of the day, you know, what you get from that question as you reflect on it can really help you understand why you practice the faith you do, why you make so many sacrifices, and why you know, share that joy of Christ with others. So thank you all so much for your attentiveness, and let's sing some karaoke.